Serenity Park, a green oasis amidst the urban chaos of Chicago, was much more than just trees and trails to the local community. For many, especially Daniel Carter, a 32-year-old black civil engineer, the park was a sanctuary. After losing his mother to a long battle with cancer, Daniel found solace and strength there, often brainstorming ways to give back to the community that had shaped him. On the other side of the city, Rebecca Walker, a 28-year-old wealthy and influential woman, was used to having her way without question. As the heir to a powerful real estate dynasty, she saw the park as nothing more than unproductive land and believed a new luxury condo project would be a much-needed upgrade for the city. The Walker Enterprise's growing interest in turning Serenity Park into a high-end development marked the beginning of an unprecedented conflict. Their worlds collided explosively during a heated community meeting. Daniel, speaking with conviction and passion, laid out a detailed plan to save the park, emphasizing its cultural and environmental significance. Rebecca, annoyed by the resistance, made a biting remark that escalated tensions. "If you care so much about this place, maybe you should just go back to Africa, where trees are all you have." The room froze. Rebecca's comments sent shockwaves through the crowd, sparking outrage among the residents. But for Daniel, it was a call to action. He resolved not only to protect the park, but to confront the ignorance Rebecca embodied. As bulldozers began encroaching on the park and tensions reached a boiling point, unexpected alliances were formed, veiled threats emerged, and a battle for the heart of the community unfolded. Serenity Park was more than a place. It was a symbol. For the predominantly black and working-class community surrounding it, the park represented resistance against a city that too often overlooked them. Church groups hosted Sunday picnics under the sycamores. Neighborhood kids practiced basketball on its aging courts, and elders reminisced on benches overlooking a small, weathered pond. Daniel Carter saw the park as a living memory. His mother, Angela, had marched there during the civil rights movement, demanding equal housing rights in the 70s. The stories she told him as a child shaped his sense of responsibility to fight for his people. A successful engineer with a modest lifestyle, Daniel was pragmatic but driven, always searching for solutions instead of excuses. Yet, his quiet demeanor masked a burning determination. Rebecca Walker's world couldn't have been more different. Raised in privilege, she'd spent summers in the Hamptons and winters skiing in Aspen. Her father, Richard Walker, had turned their real estate empire into a multi-billion-dollar powerhouse, and Rebecca was poised to take the reins. Despite her cold exterior, Rebecca wasn't entirely void of humanity. She had grown up wanting to prove herself to a father who only valued results. However, her perspective was shaped by a bubble of wealth and entitlement, leaving her blind to the struggles of those outside her circle. When the Serenity Park redevelopment proposal landed on her desk, Rebecca saw it as an easy win, a way to transform an underutilized space into luxury apartments while bolstering her career. She dismissed the opposition as a noisy but powerless minority. The community, after all, had always been pushed aside in the name of progress. However, the community wasn't backing down. Local activist groups, led by outspoken pastor Reverend Lewis Davis, organized protests. Social media became a weapon, with hashtags like #SaveSerenityPark and #WalkerGreed trending overnight. Young artists began painting murals across the neighborhood, depicting the park as a beacon of hope against a rising tide of gentrification. Despite initial backlash, Rebecca underestimated how deeply rooted the community's fight was. One day, as she walked through the park during a site inspection, she encountered Daniel planting small flags to mark areas of ecological importance. "Are you seriously trying to save the trees?" she scoffed, her tone dripping with condescension. "No," Daniel replied evenly, not looking up. "I'm trying to save the people who need them." Her dismissal was instinctive, but something in his tone unsettled her. The confidence, the resolve, it was unfamiliar, even unnerving. Rebecca wasn't the only one grappling with new realities. For Daniel, the fight became increasingly personal. Anonymous letters began showing up at his office. "This is a losing battle, Carter. Stay in your lane. A slashed tire on his car hinted at someone willing to go further to silence him. Meanwhile, Rebecca began facing unexpected resistance within her own company. Board members expressed concerns about the PR fallout, and her father's sharp criticism over the unnecessary distraction began to rattle her. Still, she pressed forward, determined not to appear weak. As tensions grew, unlikely connections began to form. A mutual acquaintance, journalist Maya Robinson, interviewed both Daniel and Rebecca for an expose on the park's battle. Maya's probing questions forced Rebecca to confront the humanity of the people she disregarded, while Daniel saw a glimmer of potential for change in her guarded responses. The park became a battlefield not only for land, but for hearts and minds. Protesters camped out overnight, facing off against construction crews. Lawyers representing the community worked late into the night to prepare a legal challenge. And as Daniel and Rebecca found themselves at the center of the storm, their interactions grew increasingly complex, marked by tension, reluctant respect, and the faintest hints of understanding. The conflict over Serenity Park escalated from heated debates to a full-blown war of wills, played out on social media, in courtrooms, and on the ground. Daniel, now a central figure in the resistance, juggled his day job with organizing protests, collaborating with environmental experts, and fielding interviews with local media. The once quiet engineer was becoming a community hero. Rebecca, on the other hand, found herself increasingly cornered. The backlash against her comments at the community meeting snowballed, with protesters targeting her personally. Memes circulated online, dubbing her Walker the Wrecker and accusing her of racism and greed. Her privilege, once a shield, now felt like a glaring spotlight exposing every misstep. To her surprise, the most damning criticism came not from outsiders but from within her company. Maya Robinson's article revealed internal memos discussing the environmental impact of the project, calling the redevelopment highly problematic. The expose also highlighted instances where the Walker family had displaced vulnerable communities in the past. Board members began to waver, questioning the feasibility of moving forward under such scrutiny. For Daniel, the fight grew more dangerous. Late one night, as he returned home from a planning meeting, he noticed the faint glow of fire through his apartment window. Rushing inside, he found his living room engulfed in flames. The fire department ruled it arson, and though Daniel escaped unharmed, the message was clear: someone wanted him to stop. Instead of backing down, the attack galvanized him. The community rallied, organizing a massive protest the next day that drew media attention from across the city. In the crowd, Daniel spotted Rebecca, observing from a distance. Their eyes met briefly before she turned and walked away, her expression unreadable. Behind the scenes, Rebecca was under immense pressure. Her father, Richard Walker, summoned her to a private meeting, his tone cold and cutting. "You've turned a simple project into a PR nightmare," he barked. "Fix it, or I will." Rebecca bristled but held her ground. "This isn't about PR. The project has flaws. Maybe we need to reconsider." "Reconsider?" Richard scoffed. "You sound like them." "You're not weak, Rebecca. Don't make me regret putting you in charge." The confrontation left her shaken. For the first time, she began questioning not just the project, but the values she'd been raised with. The next few weeks saw the stakes rise further. Daniel and the community filed an injunction to halt construction, citing environmental violations and insufficient community consultation. The court case became a flashpoint, drawing activists, environmentalists, and even celebrities to the cause. Rebecca, now the reluctant face of Walker Enterprises, found herself dragged into media interviews where she struggled to defend the project without sounding dismissive of the community's concerns. In one particularly tense moment, she faced Daniel in a televised town hall debate. The room buzzed with anticipation as the moderator introduced them. "Mr. Carter, you've said this project would destroy the community. Miss Walker, you've argued it represents progress. Why don't we start there?" Daniel's voice was steady but impassioned. "Progress isn't about glass towers and luxury apartments. It's about people. Serenity Park isn't just land, it's history, culture, and a safe space in a city that offers so few Rebecca hesitated before responding. I understand the emotional attachment to the park, but we're trying to bring economic growth to this area. Growth benefits everyone, the audience murmured in disapproval, but Daniel didn't interrupt. Instead, he asked, have you ever spent a day in this community? Talked to the people who live here. Rebecca faltered, the weight of the question cutting through her rehearsed responses. For the first time, she realized she couldn't answer honestly. The debate marked a turning point. While Rebecca struggled to maintain her composure, the community's passion and unity became undeniable. Even some of her staunchest allies began suggesting compromises. Meanwhile, threats against Daniel continued, but so did his resolve. A video of him speaking at a protest went viral, capturing his words, "We're not just fighting for trees or grass. We're fighting for the soul of this community, for our right to exist without being erased. And we won't stop." The lines were drawn, but cracks began to appear in the seemingly impenetrable wall of corporate power. Rebecca, torn between loyalty to her family and an emerging sense of accountability, found herself standing at a crossroads. As the battle over Serenity Park intensified, the personal lives of both Daniel and Rebecca began to intertwine with the public conflict in unexpected ways. The stakes of the battle were no longer just about land or development. They were about identity, personal growth, and facing uncomfortable truths. For Daniel, the conflict took a toll on his relationships. His longtime girlfriend, Jasmine, a school teacher in the community, supported his cause, but worried about his safety. "You're putting yourself in danger, Daniel," she would say, her voice heavy with concern. "What if something happens to you? What if they hurt you?" Daniel understood her fear, but he couldn't back down. He knew the fight for Serenity Park was more than just a project. It was a stand against the systemic injustice that plagued his community. "I can't let them win, Jasmine. If we don't fight for this now, what do we have left?" Despite their love for each other, the growing pressure caused a strain. Jasmine's fear for Daniel's safety began to overshadow their time together. She wanted him to focus on his career, to build a stable future, but Daniel couldn't bring himself to step away from the cause. Their conversations became increasingly heated, with Jasmine reminding him that they had a future together, and Daniel insisting that the future was already being decided for them by forces beyond their control. Meanwhile, Rebecca's own personal life was unraveling. Her father's mounting criticism weighed heavily on her, and she found herself at odds with her brother, Colin, who had always been the golden child of the family. Colin, a corporate lawyer, dismissed the protests as a nuisance, preferring to focus on expanding the family empire. He was annoyed by Rebecca's sudden shift in perspective. "Dad is right. You're being emotional about this," Colin snapped one evening when Rebecca tried to discuss the project's ethical implications. "This isn't about your feelings. It's business." Rebecca, however, felt her foundation beginning to crack. She was no longer so sure about the unquestioning loyalty she'd always had to her father's legacy. She began spending more time walking around the city, visiting neighborhoods, talking to residents, conversations that opened her eyes to the true cost of gentrification. One afternoon, after a long day of walking through the community, Rebecca found herself standing at the gates of Serenity Park, watching families enjoy the space she'd once seen as disposable. For the first time, she could see what Daniel had been fighting for. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. She had been blind to the importance of this place, not just as land, but as a symbol of resilience, history, and community. Her internal conflict deepened. Rebecca was no longer sure if she could follow through with the project, but she also feared the consequences of backing down. Would her father disown her? Would her company collapse without the funding this project promised? The weight of these decisions seemed unbearable, but one thing was clear: she could no longer ignore the truth. Daniel, too, faced growing complexity. The fight for Serenity Park was starting to show signs of progress, but not without personal sacrifices. The financial strain was mounting. The legal fees were steep, and the emotional toll was even higher. As the community rallied, Daniel felt the burden of being their symbol of hope. He couldn't let them down, but he also couldn't help but wonder if his own dreams, his career, his family would be irreparably damaged by this battle. Yet, As the threats continued to escalate, Daniel found unexpected allies. Maya Robinson, the journalist who had initially covered the story, came to him with an offer. "I can get you in front of a bigger audience," she said. "We can tell your story on national news. We'll make sure people know who's really behind this fight." Maya's support was invaluable, but it came with its own set of complications. The media attention only increased the tension, making the fight over Serenity Park a public spectacle. Daniel had to balance the increasing scrutiny with the need to stay grounded in his community. He worried that in fighting to save the park, he might lose the very people he was trying to protect. Rebecca, too, found her influence spreading in unexpected ways. As public opinion shifted, she found herself the target of more direct challenges from her own colleagues. Board members were pushing her to abandon the project, citing the growing risk to their reputation. At the same time, members of the community began approaching her, offering tentative gestures of support, hoping that her change of heart would be enough to bring the redevelopment to a halt. For both Daniel and Rebecca, their journey had become more than a battle for the park. It was a personal reckoning. Could they reconcile the conflicting parts of themselves? Could they find a way to stand for what was right, even at the expense of everything they had worked for? The battle for Serenity Park reached a boiling point with a pivotal court hearing. The community's injunction to halt construction had been granted temporarily, but the final ruling was fast approaching. The hearing would determine whether the redevelopment project would proceed or be permanently blocked. Tensions in the neighborhood were palpable. Protest signs were everywhere, and nightly gatherings filled the park with chants and prayers. For Daniel, the stakes had never been higher. As he prepared to testify in court, he knew the weight of his community's hopes rested on his shoulders. His legal team had uncovered damning evidence. Walker Enterprises had ignored environmental regulations, fabricated community support, and sidestepped mandatory public consultations. But Daniel also knew the system was not designed for people like him to win. He couldn't rely on justice alone. He needed to sway public opinion. Rebecca, too, faced mounting pressure. Her father, Richard Walker, had made it clear that he expected her to take the stand and defend the project. The family's entire business reputation was on the line, and Richard was determined to see the redevelopment succeed at any cost. Yet, Rebecca's recent experiences with the community had left her deeply conflicted. On the morning of the hearing, Rebecca stood in her father's office, her nerves raw. "You know what to say," Richard told her, his tone devoid of empathy. "This is your chance to prove yourself. Don't let emotions cloud your judgment." Rebecca hesitated. "What if we're wrong? What if this project does more harm than good?" Richard's eyes hardened. "Then you'll learn the same lesson I did. It doesn't matter if you're right or wrong. It matters if you win." Those words lingered in Rebecca's mind as she walked into the packed courthouse. The hearing began with both sides presenting their cases. The Walker Enterprises lawyers argued that the redevelopment would bring much-needed economic growth to the area, citing inflated projections of job creation and increased property values. When it was Daniel's turn to speak, the courtroom fell silent. Standing tall but visibly tense, he described the history of Serenity Park and what it meant to the community. His voice trembled only slightly as he recounted stories of families who used the park as a sanctuary from the city's harsh realities, emphasizing the cultural and environmental loss that the redevelopment would bring. "This isn't just a park," Daniel said, his voice growing stronger with each word. "It's a lifeline for people who have nowhere else to go. If you take it away, you're not just destroying trees, you're erasing a part of this community's soul." The moment was electric. Even Rebecca, sitting behind her legal team, felt the power of his words. She glanced at her father, whose expression remained stoic, and then back at Daniel, whose passion was undeniable. When Rebecca was called to the stand, the courtroom held its breath. Everyone expected her to deliver a rehearsed defense of the project. Instead, she paused, scanning the room. She saw Daniel's determined gaze, the hopeful faces of the community members, and her father's icy glare. Taking a deep breath, Rebecca began. "I was raised to believe that progress means building bigger and better things, no matter the cost. But standing here today, I realized that true progress isn't measured in dollars or square footage. It's measured in the well-being of people. Her voice shook, but she pressed on. I've seen what Serenity Park means to this community, and I can't, in good conscience, support a project that would destroy it. Gasps filled the room. Richard's face darkened with fury, but Rebecca didn't look at him. She focused on the judge, on the audience, and finally on Daniel. I withdraw my support for the redevelopment, she concluded, and I urge this court to rule in favor of the community. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Daniel stared at Rebecca, stunned. For a moment, he saw not the privileged, dismissive woman who had insulted him at the community meeting, but someone capable of change. The judge called for order and announced that the court would adjourn to deliberate. Outside, a crowd of protesters erupted in cheers as word spread about Rebecca's testimony. For Daniel, it felt like a victory, but he knew the fight wasn't over yet. The court's decision would still determine the park's fate. As the sun set over Serenity Park that evening, Daniel and Rebecca found themselves standing at opposite ends of the same protest rally. Slowly, Rebecca approached him, her expression a mix of uncertainty and resolve. I meant what I said, she told him. I'm sorry for everything I've done. I want to make things right. Daniel studied her for a long moment before nodding. It's a start, he replied. The turning point had been reached not just for the battle over the park, but for two individuals from opposite worlds, united by a shared sense of purpose. The day after Rebecca's shocking courtroom testimony, the city buzzed with speculation and debate. News outlets and social media exploded with coverage of her decision to withdraw her support for the Serenity Park redevelopment. Some hailed her as a hero for standing up to her father and the corporate machine, while others accused her of betraying her family and acting out of self-interest. Richard Walker wasted no time in retaliating. By the following morning, Walker Enterprises had released a carefully crafted statement condemning Rebecca's actions, framing her as a misguided idealist whose views did not represent the company's values. Behind closed doors, the fallout was even harsher. You've humiliated this family, Richard spat during a tense meeting in his penthouse office. Do you think they'll celebrate you for this? You've burned every bridge you've ever had, Rebecca. I'm not looking for celebration, she said quietly. I'm looking to do what's right. Richard's response was swift and brutal. He stripped Rebecca of her executive position and cut off her access to company resources. But even as her professional world crumbled, Rebecca felt an odd sense of relief. For the first time in her life, she was making decisions based on her own conscience, not her father's expectations. Meanwhile, Daniel faced his own set of consequences. Though Rebecca's testimony had turned the tide of public opinion, the community's fight was far from over. The court ruling on the park's future loomed, and tensions remained high. Protesters continued their nightly vigils, and Daniel became a figurehead of the movement, his name now synonymous with resistance against corporate greed. But the pressure weighed heavily on him. Jasmine's patience was wearing thin, and their relationship grew increasingly strained. You've done so much already, she told him one night. Maybe it's time to think about us, about our future. Daniel struggled to find the words. He loved Jasmine deeply, but how could he walk away when the battle wasn't over? As Daniel grappled with his personal life, Rebecca began working to make amends. She returned to the community, reaching out to activists, pastors, and residents she had once dismissed. Though many were skeptical, her sincerity began to break down barriers. She partnered with Maya Robinson to organize a fundraiser for the Legal Defense Fund, using her connections to bring in donors who would have otherwise ignored the cause. One evening, as Daniel was coordinating a protest strategy meeting, Rebecca arrived unannounced. The room fell silent as she entered, her presence still a point of contention for some. I know I'm the last person you want to see, Rebecca began, her voice steady despite the weight of their stares. But I'm here to help. I know I've done harm, and I can't erase that. But I want to stand with you now. Daniel regarded her with measured caution. Words are one thing, Rebecca. Actions are another. She nodded. Then let me prove it. Over the following weeks, Rebecca immersed herself in the fight for Serenity Park. She used her insider knowledge to expose Walker Enterprises' shady practices, leaking documents that revealed years of corruption and environmental violations. Her efforts didn't go unnoticed, and soon, public sentiment shifted even further in favor of the community. As the court date approached, tensions reached a fever pitch. Protesters clashed with private security forces hired by Walker Enterprises, leading to arrests and minor injuries. Daniel was among those detained during one of the confrontations, but the sight of him being dragged away in handcuffs only fueled the movement. By the time he was released, he was greeted by a crowd of cheering supporters outside the police station. "I'm not giving up," Daniel told the crowd. "Not today. Not ever." Rebecca, too, faced backlash. Her former colleagues ostracized her, and her brother Colin went so far as to publicly disavow her actions. "She's gone rogue," he told reporters. "Rebecca doesn't speak for our family," but Rebecca refused to be deterred. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was fighting for something real. Finally, the day of the court ruling arrived. The courtroom was packed, and outside, hundreds of protesters gathered, holding signs and chanting. Inside, the judge delivered the verdict. The redevelopment project was permanently blocked on the grounds of environmental violations and lack of community consultation. Serenity Park would remain untouched. Cheers erupted in the courtroom, and Daniel felt an overwhelming surge of relief and pride. The community had won. Rebecca, sitting quietly at the back of the room, allowed herself a small, bittersweet smile. She had lost everything she once thought important, but for the first time, she felt truly free. That evening, the community celebrated in Serenity Park. Music filled the air, children played, and neighbors shared stories of the fight that had brought them together. Amidst the crowd, Daniel and Rebecca found themselves standing face to face. "You did it," Rebecca said. "No," Daniel replied. "We did it." In the weeks following the court's decision, Serenity Park became more than a victory. It was a symbol of unity, resilience, and hope. But for Daniel and Rebecca, the fight had left scars and lessons that neither could ignore. For Daniel, the battle had cemented his role as a leader, but it also forced him to confront the toll it had taken on his personal life. His relationship with Jasmine had suffered deeply during the conflict. Though she supported his cause, she felt overshadowed by it. One quiet evening, as they walked through the park together, she voiced her concerns. "Daniel, I'm proud of you," she began, her hand brushing his. "But I don't know if there's room for us in this life you've chosen." Her words hit Daniel harder than he expected. "Jasmine, I never wanted to lose you in all this," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But this fight, it wasn't just about me. It was about something bigger than both of us." She nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I know. That's why I love you. But we've grown apart, and I don't know how to fix it." Their conversation ended with a quiet understanding that, despite their love, they needed time apart. It was a painful but necessary step for both of them to heal. Rebecca, meanwhile, had embarked on a path of rebuilding not her former life, but a new one with a foundation of accountability and purpose. Cut off from Walker Enterprises, she began using her resources to support community-driven projects. Partnering with Maya Robinson, she launched an initiative to protect other urban green spaces across the city. One of her first actions was to donate a significant portion of her personal wealth to fund scholarships for students in Serenity Park's neighborhood. "Education and opportunity," she said during a small ceremony, "are what bridge divides. I've spent too long ignoring the truth, but now I'm here to help build something better." Her gestures didn't erase her past mistakes, but they marked the beginning of genuine change. Slowly, the community began to accept her efforts. Daniel, though initially skeptical, saw the consistency in her actions and recognized the transformation. The two crossed paths frequently, as Rebecca's new projects often aligned with the community's needs. At first, their interactions were polite but distant. Over time, a mutual respect developed, born from shared experiences and the realization that they both had grown through the struggle. One afternoon, while Daniel was supervising the construction of a new community garden funded by Rebecca's initiative, she approached him with a notebook in hand. "I wanted to show you something," she said, her tone tentative but warm. Inside the notebook were sketches of a park amphitheater, a collaborative idea she had developed with local artists and architects to create a cultural hub for the neighborhood. "I know it's not much," Rebecca said, "but I thought it could be a way to celebrate everything this park stands for." Daniel flipped through the pages, nodding as he took in the details. "This could work," he said finally, meeting her eyes. "You're really serious about this, aren't you?" She smiled. "I have to be. This place changed me." Their collaboration on the amphitheater became a turning point for both of them. Working side by side, they found common ground not just in their shared goals, but in their understanding of each other's journeys. Daniel learned that Rebecca's upbringing had shaped her blind spots, but also her ability to change. Rebecca, in turn, came to see Daniel not just as a relentless activist, but as someone who carried the weight of his community with grace and determination. As the months passed, the amphitheater was completed, and its opening ceremony drew hundreds of residents, city officials, and supporters. Daniel stood on the stage alongside Rebecca, both of them addressing the crowd as partners in a shared vision for the future. "This park belongs to all of us," Daniel said, his voice ringing out across the gathering. "And it stands as proof that when we come together, we can protect what matters most." Rebecca added, "Change starts when we listen to each other. I've learned more from this community than I ever thought possible, and I'm honored to be a part of its future." The applause was thunderous, and in that moment, Serenity Park was more than a patch of green in the middle of the city. It was a testament to growth, unity, and the power of redemption. Though Serenity Park had been saved, the ripple effects of the battle were far from over. As Daniel and Rebecca worked together to solidify the park's role as a community hub, new challenges arose that threatened to unravel their progress. Walker Enterprises, reeling from their defeat in court, launched a PR campaign aimed at discrediting the victory. Ads framed the company as the victim of anti-growth extremism, blaming the community for stifling progress, and claiming the redevelopment would have uplifted the city's economy. These efforts, led by Richard Walker and his son Colin, reignited tensions within the city. Rebecca, now a public figure for opposing her family, became a direct target of their smear campaign. Headlines labeled her as a traitor to progress, and reporters camped outside her modest new apartment, hounding her for statements. Rebecca's resolve remained firm, but the relentless attacks weighed on her. Daniel, too, felt the pressure. The newfound attention on Serenity Park brought both opportunities and complications. Funding offers for new projects poured in, but they came with strings attached. Some donors sought to use the park's newfound fame to push their own agendas, from naming rights to commercializing parts of the land. Faced with these pressures, Daniel and Rebecca convened with a group of trusted community leaders, including Reverend Lewis Davis and Maya Robinson. "We fought to keep this park for the community," Daniel said during the meeting. "We can't let it become another tool for outside interests." Reverend Davis nodded. "But we also have to be realistic. If we want to maintain this space, we'll need resources. The question is, where do we draw the line?" The group spent hours debating proposals, their discussions growing increasingly heated. Rebecca, despite her strained relationships with her family, offered an unexpected suggestion. "I can reach out to people I know, private donors who care about preserving community spaces," she said cautiously. "But I'll need your trust to make sure they align with our goals." The room fell silent. Though some were hesitant to involve more outsiders, Daniel spoke up. "If Rebecca is willing to vouch for them, I think we should hear them out. She's earned that much." Rebecca's heart swelled at his words. It was the first time she felt fully accepted by the group, a sign that her actions had truly made a difference. As they began vetting potential partners, Colin Walker made an unexpected move. He filed a lawsuit on behalf of Walker Enterprises, claiming that the court ruling had been influenced by biased testimony. The legal challenge sought to reopen the case, putting Serenity Park's fate back on the line. The announcement sent shockwaves through the community. Protests reignited, drawing even larger crowds than before. The neighborhood was determined not to lose what they had fought so hard to protect. For Rebecca, the lawsuit was personal. Colin's attack was not just against the park, but against her integrity. She began preparing for a deposition, knowing that her testimony would once again be crucial in swaying the outcome. Daniel worked tirelessly to rally the community, organizing events to raise awareness and strengthen their resolve. But the pressure of the renewed fight began to take its toll. Late one night, as he walked through the quiet park, he found Rebecca sitting alone on a bench, staring at the moonlit trees. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked, taking a seat beside her. She shook her head. "Sometimes I wonder if I made everything worse. My family's coming at this harder than ever because of me." Daniel looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "Your family was always going to come after this place. The difference now is that we're ready for them. And that's because of you." Her eyes glistened with gratitude, but also exhaustion. "It's just a lot." "It is," he admitted. "But we've come too far to stop now." The moment was brief but grounding, a reminder of the shared purpose that had brought them together. As the new court date approached, both Daniel and Rebecca prepared for the climax of their fight. The stakes were higher than ever, but so was their resolve. They knew that this time, the fight wasn't just about Serenity Park, it was about proving that change was possible, even in the face of overwhelming opposition. The new court hearing was set to be the final battle for Serenity Park. The air was thick with tension as the courtroom filled with journalists, community members, activists, and representatives from Walker Enterprises. Outside, hundreds of protesters chanted and held signs, their voices echoing through the city streets. Rebecca and Daniel sat side by side at the plaintiff's table, an unlikely team that had come to embody the fight for justice. Across the aisle sat Richard Walker and Colin, their legal team exuding confidence and contempt. The Walker Enterprises lawyers launched their case with aggression, claiming that the initial ruling had been biased and alleging that the park's defenders had exaggerated its cultural and environmental significance. Colin, taking the stand, painted the redevelopment as a project of vision and opportunity, while dismissing the community's resistance as sentimental obstructionism. When it was Rebecca's turn to testify, the room seemed to hold its collective breath. She spoke with measured calm, recounting her own journey from supporting the project to understanding its devastating impact on the community. "I was wrong," she admitted, her voice steady but full of emotion. "I saw Serenity Park as just another piece of land to exploit, but I was blind to what it truly represents. This park is the heartbeat of a community that has been overlooked and silenced for far too long. Destroying it isn't progress. It's erasure." Her words resonated deeply, not just with the courtroom, but with those watching the live coverage. Even the judge seemed moved, his expression softening as Rebecca concluded her testimony. Daniel was the final witness. As he stood at the podium, the weight of the community's hope pressed heavily on him, but he met the moment with quiet determination. "This fight isn't just about a park," he began. "It's about people, about our right to exist and thrive in a city that too often prioritizes profit over humanity. Serenity Park isn't just green space. It's where our children play, where our elders find peace, and where our stories are told. Losing it would mean losing a piece of ourselves." His testimony was met with silence, but it was the kind of silence that carried the weight of understanding. The defense attempted to dismantle their arguments, questioning the legitimacy of their claims and portraying Walker Enterprises as a misunderstood benefactor. But their efforts felt hollow against the raw truth that Rebecca and Daniel had presented. When the final arguments concluded, the judge adjourned the court, announcing that the decision would be delivered the next day. That night, the community gathered in Serenity Park for a candlelight vigil. Families, activists, and allies filled the space, their shared anxiety tempered by a quiet sense of solidarity. Daniel stood at the center, surrounded by supporters, while Rebecca lingered at the edge of the crowd, her gaze fixed on the flickering candles. As the first light of dawn broke, the courtroom reconvened. The judge, his expression unreadable, began to deliver the verdict. After careful consideration of the evidence and testimony presented, this court finds that the redevelopment project for Serenity Park violates both environmental protections and the principles of equitable community engagement. The injunction is upheld, and the redevelopment project is permanently blocked. The courtroom erupted in cheers. Tears streamed down Daniel's face as he embraced Reverend Davis and Maya Robinson. Rebecca, though more composed, allowed herself a small, relieved smile. Outside, the crowd exploded with jubilation. Protesters sang, danced, and hugged one another, their victory a testament to the power of collective action. As Daniel stepped out of the courthouse, he was met with thunderous applause. Rebecca followed close behind, her presence drawing a more hesitant but still appreciative response from the crowd. When Daniel turned to her, his expression was one of gratitude. "We did it," he said simply. "No," Rebecca replied, her voice soft but resolute. "You did it. I just finally learned how to listen." The two of them stood side by side as cameras flashed and voices cheered, the unlikely pair now inseparable from the story of Serenity Park's salvation. The celebration in Serenity Park lasted well into the evening. Families gathered around makeshift picnic tables. Musicians played under the newly restored oak trees, and children ran freely across the grass. The victory wasn't just about saving the park. It was a symbol of what the community could achieve when they stood together. Daniel walked among the crowd, greeted by smiles and handshakes at every turn. Despite his exhaustion, a profound sense of fulfillment radiated from him. The months of struggle, the sacrifices, and the uncertainty had all been worth it. Rebecca, standing near the newly painted Serenity mural, watched the scene unfold. She felt out of place amidst the laughter and joy, unsure if she truly belonged in the celebration. She had played a role, but the victory was the community's, and she didn't want to take that from them. Daniel noticed her standing alone and approached with a small plate of food. "You're not leaving without celebrating, are you?" Rebecca smiled, taking the plate. "I wasn't sure if I'd earned a seat at the table." "You've earned it," Daniel said. "More than you know." They sat together on a bench, watching the community enjoy the park they had fought so hard to protect. Rebecca hesitated before speaking, her voice quieter than usual. "I've been thinking a lot about what's next," she began. "I can't go back to the life I had, but I want to keep fighting for spaces like this, for people like this." Daniel nodded. "The work doesn't stop here. Serenity Park is just the beginning. There are a lot of places that need saving, and a lot of voices that need amplifying." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the sound of children's laughter in the distance. The following weeks marked a new chapter for both Daniel and Rebecca. Serenity Park became a shining example of what a united community could accomplish. The amphitheater project Rebecca had proposed moved forward, with local artists and residents contributing to its design. It quickly became a hub for cultural events, from poetry readings to live music performances. Rebecca launched a nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting urban green spaces and advocating for underserved communities. Though she faced challenges in earning trust and funding, her determination never wavered. The work gave her life a newfound purpose, one rooted in humility and service. For Daniel, the fight solidified his role as a community leader. He used his engineering skills to spearhead other neighborhood improvement projects, ensuring the park's success inspired broader change. Though his relationship with Jasmine didn't survive the strain of the battle, they parted on good terms, and Daniel found solace in knowing his efforts had paved the way for future generations. Months later, on the first anniversary of the court's decision, the community hosted a celebration in Serenity Park. The amphitheater was officially unveiled, its stage adorned with vibrant murals depicting the park's history and the people who had fought for it. Daniel stood at the microphone, addressing the crowd. "This park isn't just a place, it's a testament to what we can achieve when we come together. Serenity Park belongs to all of us, and it will stand as a reminder that progress doesn't have to come at the cost of people." Rebecca joined him on stage, her presence greeted with warm applause. "This community taught me what real progress means," she said. "It's about lifting people up, not tearing them down. I'm grateful to have been part of this journey, and I look forward to continuing this work alongside all of you." As the evening wore on, the amphitheater filled with music, laughter, and stories of the fight that had brought everyone together. Daniel and Rebecca sat side by side, their paths forever linked by the battle for Serenity Park. The park, once a symbol of division, now stood as a beacon of hope, a reminder that change was possible, even in the face of overwhelming odds. 5 years later, Serenity Park thrived as the beating heart of its community. The amphitheater, now a cherished landmark, hosted weekly events ranging from youth talent showcases to cultural festivals. The park's transformation from a battleground to a sanctuary was a story told and retold, inspiring movements in cities across the country. Daniel Carter stood at the edge of the park on a bright spring morning, watching as a group of children laughed and chased each other near the pond. His once silent resolve had grown into a voice of authority and hope. Now a respected community leader, Daniel had founded a citywide coalition advocating for green spaces in underserved neighborhoods. As he turned toward the newly planted community garden, a familiar voice called out behind him, "Still keeping busy, I see." Daniel turned to find Rebecca Walker, dressed casually, but still exuding the quiet confidence she had developed since stepping away from her family's shadow. Her nonprofit, now a national organization, had saved dozens of urban spaces and helped amplify the voices of marginalized communities. "Someone has to," Daniel replied with a grin. Rebecca smiled, handing him a brochure for an upcoming fundraiser. "Thought you might want to see what we're working on next." Daniel scanned the brochure, which outlined plans for a series of interconnected parks across the city's most neglected neighborhoods. "Ambitious," he said, nodding. "But I wouldn't expect anything less." She tilted her head playfully. "Coming from the guy who once planted flags in the middle of a construction site. I think you're one to talk about ambition." They both laughed, a comfortable camaraderie between them. Over the years, their partnership had deepened into a friendship built on mutual respect and shared purpose. As Rebecca walked toward the amphitheater to greet the crowd gathering for an event, Daniel took one last look at the park. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, their branches casting dappled shadows on the grass. Serenity Park was no longer just a place. It was a legacy, a living reminder that when people stood together, they could rewrite the future. And for Daniel and Rebecca, it was a testament to how far they had come, not just as individuals, but as partners in a movement that would continue to grow long after they were gone. The story of Serenity Park is more than a tale of struggle and triumph. It's a reminder of the power we hold when we come together to fight for what matters. Across the world, countless communities face battles like Daniel's and Rebecca's, standing against forces that threaten their homes, their histories, and their futures. This is your chance to make a difference. Look around your own neighborhood. Is there a park, a school, a cultural landmark, or a safe space that needs protecting? Get involved. Join local organizations, attend community meetings, and lend your voice to those who are fighting for justice and equity. Change starts with people like you. Let the legacy of Serenity Park inspire you to take action in your own community. Share this story, start conversations, and remember, progress is only real when it lifts everyone. Together, we can build a future where every space is a place for belonging, growth, and unity.